He met the man of his dreams on a Tuesday. It was raining. A kind of soft, steady rain that made you want to stay indoors, wrapped in warmth, away from the world. And that's exactly what Julian Carter was doing, browsing a forum for freelance artists when a comment under one of his digital paintings caught his attention. It was thoughtful. Strangely specific. Not the kind of flattery that brushed the surface, but one that hinted someone had actually studied his work. Read between the lines. Julian clicked the profile. The user had no profile picture, no visible name. Just a message, "This made me feel something. I'd like to know you." They spoke for hours that night. About art. About grief. About the weight of wanting to be seen, but fearing what would happen if someone really looked. Julian hadn't opened up like that in years. And from those early conversations, something grew. Messages turned into late-night calls. Calls into shared playlists. And then, after 2 months, plane tickets. Eric Donovan was charming. Confident without being arrogant. He showed up at LAX with a sign that read, "Welcome home, stranger," and Julian couldn't stop laughing. He remembered thinking, this might actually be safe. For the first time in a long while, he let his guard down. They moved fast. People said it was too fast. But when you've spent years convincing yourself you're unworthy of love, and someone finally shows up who calls you beautiful without hesitation, you cling to them. They moved in together after 4 months. Married by the end of the year. And for a while, things were good. Quiet. Simple. But then came the lies. They started small. A change in the work schedule. Business trips that didn't match up with calendar invites. Receipts Julian never remembered seeing. He ignored them at first. People get busy. Mistakes happen. But mistakes started to stack like bricks, and suddenly there was a wall between them. One Eric couldn't, or wouldn't, explain. Julian found the second phone by accident. It was wedged beneath a pile of laundry in the back of the closet. Still plugged in. Still warm. He picked it up and stared at the lock screen. A message preview slid across the top, "Baby's kicking again. She's going to have your smile." He unlocked it. And his whole world stopped. There were pictures. Dozens. Of Eric with another woman. Beach dates. Dinner selfies. A gender reveal video where he looked straight into the camera and said, "I can't wait to meet our daughter." Julian dropped the phone. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, he said nothing. He couldn't. He just stared at the ceiling, listening to Eric breathe beside him, and tried to count how many lies it takes to erase a life. But this isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about how love, when used as a weapon, can turn everything you believe into something unrecognizable. And when the police were finally called, it wasn't because of the affair. It was because someone stopped breathing. And someone else didn't try to help. This is the story of a man who believed he found forever, only to discover he was a character in someone else's lie. A lie that would cost more than a marriage. It would cost a life. And everything, every betrayal, every secret, every message left unread, led to a single moment no one saw coming. Now, we begin. It began in Los Angeles. The city of angels, but also a city of masks, where love stories bloom fast under palm trees and unravel just as quickly in the silence of high-rise apartments. Julian Carter was 32 when he met Eric Donovan. A digital illustrator with a quiet soul and a small but devoted online following. He lived alone in a loft in Echo Park, surrounded by his sketchbooks, old records, and a cat named Oliver. His life was small, structured, safe. He'd learned to keep it that way after a string of relationships that ended in manipulation and emotional bruises too deep for anyone to see. Eric, by contrast, was light in motion. A businessman from Toronto. Suave. Ambitious. The kind of man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. He said he worked in consulting, the kind of vague answer that didn't invite too many follow-ups. And for a while, Julian didn't ask. They met in person for the first time in December of 2021. Julian still remembered the smell of Eric's cologne, citrus and sandalwood. They spent 2 weeks together before Eric suggested moving in. "Why waste time?" he said. "When you know, you know." Friends warned Julian to slow down. But Julian had spent years being careful. And where had it gotten him? Lonely birthdays. Quiet holidays. Voice memos from people who only remembered him when they needed something. So, he said yes. Within 6 months, they were married in a courthouse ceremony. Just the two of them, 2 strangers as witnesses, and a photographer Julian hired off Craigslist. Eric promised a big celebration next year. That celebration never happened. What did happen was a shift. Eric became harder to reach during the day. Work trips doubled. He stopped posting pictures of Julian. He locked his phone when he never used to. When Julian asked, Eric would laugh it off. "You're overthinking again," he'd say, brushing a hand through Julian's hair. "Relax. We're good." But Julian didn't feel good. He felt invisible. It wasn't until October of 2022 that he began piecing things together. First, the mysterious phone call. Julian was doing laundry when Eric's phone rang on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up, "Mia, midwife." His heart skipped. A chill ran down his spine. Eric never mentioned anyone named Mia. And certainly not a midwife. He let it go, for a day. Then came the second phone. Buried under clothes in the closet, as if it were forgotten. Or meant to be forgotten. Inside were hundreds of texts to a woman named Jasmine Lee, pictures. Voicemails. A nursery being painted in shades of lavender. A baby shower invitation. One text read, "Can't wait till she's born. Julian thinks I'm in New York for work." Julian stared at it for what felt like hours. He read every word twice. Some 3 times. His stomach turned. Jasmine Lee, 28. A marketing assistant from Santa Monica. Their conversations dated back a full year. Which meant Eric had been living 2 lives, since nearly the beginning. Julian didn't scream. He didn't cry. He waited. He waited until Eric came home. He made dinner. Set the table. Said nothing. And when Eric kissed his forehead, told him he was tired, and went to shower. Julian picked up the second phone, and pressed play on a voicemail Jasmine left just days before. "I know you're tired, babe. I am too. But this is worth it. We're gonna have a family. Just a few more months. She'll be here. And you'll never have to hide again." Julian sat on the floor of the kitchen, listening to it on loop. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he looked back at everything. Every strange moment. Every gut feeling he'd buried under the hope that this time, maybe, he wouldn't be left behind. What he didn't know was that the worst had yet to come. Because while Julian was quietly unraveling the truth, Jasmine was writing a birth plan with Eric. And in just 3 weeks, the baby would arrive. But what none of them could predict, is what would happen when all 3 of their worlds collided in one room. A room that would soon be cordoned off with yellow tape. And echoing with the sound of sirens. Julian didn't confront Eric right away. Instead, he watched. He documented. He began saving screenshots, backing up texts, logging calls and voicemail timestamps. Something inside him shifted, not rage, not yet, but a steady ache. A knowing. He had loved a ghost. In the days that followed, the house turned colder, quieter. Eric moved like a man performing his role, dinner conversations were hollow, kisses mechanical, excuses practiced. And Julian, who once poured his heart into the smallest gestures, fresh coffee every morning, handwritten notes slipped into suit pockets, stopped trying. The tipping point came on a Thursday evening. Eric came home late, shirt stained with what he claimed was red wine from a client dinner. But when Julian leaned in, there was no scent of alcohol. Just cheap soap and anxiety. Julian asked, "How was New York?" Eric blinked. "You said you were flying out Monday. Back tonight." Eric hesitated. "It was cancelled. I stayed in LA." Julian nodded slowly. "You weren't here." Eric looked away. "I was staying at a hotel near the client's office." "Closer." Julian didn't reply. He just turned and walked into the bedroom. What Eric didn't know was that Julian had followed him the day before. Rented a car. Stayed 2 cars behind on the freeway. Parked across from a modest home in Westwood where Jasmine answered the door barefoot and glowing, visibly pregnant. Eric kissed her. They laughed. He carried groceries into the house. Stayed the night. Julian sat in the car for hours, engine off, fingers clenched so tightly they went numb. The next morning, Julian reached out to Jasmine. An email. Nothing dramatic. No accusations. Just a subject line, "We need to talk." No reply. The second message included a photo, Eric and Julian on their wedding day. Her response came within the hour. She wrote, "I don't understand. He told me he was divorced. He said you were unstable." Julian stared at the message until tears blurred his vision. That weekend, he met Jasmine at a cafe in Pasadena. She looked exhausted. Confused. But kind. Over the course of 2 hours, they pieced together overlapping timelines, uncovered lie after lie. Eric had been shuttling between their homes like a man living in a play, changing costumes and scripts depending on his stage. With Julian, he was the exhausted husband. With Jasmine, the excited father-to-be. Julian asked her if she still loved him. Jasmine didn't answer. 3 weeks later, the baby was born. A girl. Amelia. Eric sent Julian a text that night, "Won't be home tonight. Emergency at work." Julian didn't reply. He already knew where Eric was. But it wasn't the birth that sent things over the edge. It was the Instagram post. Jasmine uploaded a picture, Eric holding the baby in the hospital room, eyes glassy with emotion. The caption read, "Our beginning. You saved me. You chose us." Julian's phone lit up with messages from mutual friends, co-workers, even family members who had no idea he was married to Eric. Some asked if it was true. Others said they were sorry. Julian locked himself in the bathroom and vomited. Later that night, Jasmine called. Her voice was shaky. "He left," she whispered. Said he had to think. He took his suitcase. Said he needed space. Julian sat on the edge of the bathtub. "Where do you think he went?" Jasmine didn't answer. Because they both already knew. Eric was unraveling. That weekend, Eric didn't go to work. He didn't go home. He checked into a motel in Reseda under a different name. Security footage showed him pacing the parking lot at 3 a.m. Phone records revealed he'd called his mother, a therapist, and a lawyer, all within 6 hours. Meanwhile, Julian and Jasmine started talking daily. The unlikeliest of alliances forged by betrayal. Then came the letter. Mailed to Julian's apartment in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. From Eric. "I'm sorry. I thought I could be everything to both of you. I've failed. I'm scared. I don't know how to fix it. Please forgive me." It ended with no signature. Just a hotel room number. Julian and Jasmine debated what to do. She wanted to go. Julian wasn't sure. That night, Eric's brother called. Eric hadn't shown up to a family event. Hadn't answered calls. Wasn't at the office. The motel staff opened the door to room 217 the next morning. The bed was untouched. Eric was gone. And next to the phone, was a sealed envelope. Addressed to both of them. Inside was a single line. "The truth is never enough. I thought it would be." On the dresser lay a wedding ring. Next to it, a positive paternity test. Dated 6 months ago. But that wasn't the most haunting detail. The most haunting detail was the third letter found later that night in the hospital parking lot. This one wasn't addressed to Julian. Or Jasmine. It was addressed to Amelia. And it ended with 6 words. "I hope you never find me." At that moment, both women realized. This was no longer about betrayal. It was now, a disappearance. What no one realized in those first few days was that Eric's disappearance wasn't just a breakdown, or a man fleeing shame. It was the beginning of something far more disturbing, something that crossed the line from emotional betrayal, into criminal deception, and ultimately, tragedy. It started with the security footage. Julian requested it on a hunch. He called the motel where Eric had last been seen. He expected to see Eric checking out, maybe leaving quietly in the night. But what he saw instead, chilled him. At 3:17 a.m., Eric walked out of room 217 wearing a hooded sweatshirt, head down, carrying a single black duffel bag. He paused in front of the motel office, glanced toward the security camera, then turned and walked away from the building. Not toward a car. Not toward the street. Toward the woods behind the lot. He never came back. Authorities weren't immediately alarmed. Adults disappear. People vanish for a while, especially those going through emotional or financial stress. But Julian pushed. So did Jasmine. They insisted something was wrong. 3 days later, Eric's car was found abandoned 20 miles away, parked at the edge of a dried-up creek in a rural area just outside Los Angeles County. The doors were unlocked. The keys were gone. And inside the trunk, were Eric's second cell phone, an empty briefcase, and a torn baby photo of Amelia with one corner burnt, the rest soaked in what appeared to be gasoline. That's when the investigation officially began. Detectives pulled financial records. What they found painted a picture far more complex than anyone expected. Eric's accounts were drained. Not just low, completely empty. Joint accounts with Julian had been closed weeks earlier without his knowledge. Jasmine's maternity account, which Eric had set up and promised would cover hospital bills, had also been cleared out. And then came the fraud allegations. Julian received a notice from the IRS. Someone had filed a joint return using his name and Eric's, but the routing number wasn't linked to their bank. Jasmine's credit score dropped 120 points in 1 month. Her name was attached to a lease for a luxury condo in Santa Monica. She had never been there. But Eric had. Surveillance footage from the building showed him arriving alone, often late at night, always looking over his shoulder. By now, investigators realized they weren't just dealing with a missing person. They were dealing with a double life. No longer just emotional, but financial, and potentially criminal. One detective, Monica Ruiz, took a deeper look into Eric's professional life. He worked as a financial consultant for a mid-tier investment firm. But Monica found discrepancies. Client portfolios had been altered. Digital signatures forged. One elderly client had filed a complaint 6 months earlier, stating that Eric had withdrawn $80,000 without authorization. The case had been dismissed quietly, but the money was never returned. Julian had no idea. Neither did Jasmine. When Ruiz confronted the firm, she discovered something else. Eric was under internal investigation. He had been suspended pending review, but told everyone, including his husband and Jasmine, that he was being promoted. He even bought a fake plaque and kept it on his desk at home. Then came the call. An anonymous tip came into the local sheriff's department. A man's body had been spotted in an abandoned shack deep in the Angeles National Forest. The area had been closed for months due to fire risk. Officers responded. They entered the cabin with flashlights raised. Inside was a mattress, 2 empty water jugs, and what appeared to be a journal, burnt at the edges. But no body. Only blood. A lot of it. Dried, pooled near the back wall. And on the windowsill, a single photograph. Eric and Julian on their honeymoon. Torn right through the middle. DNA confirmed the blood belonged to Eric. But without a body, no death could be confirmed. That's when the focus shifted again, from disappearance to possible staged death. Detectives searched Eric's financials again. They traced a wire transfer of $9,000 sent to a private investigator in Nevada, 2 days before Eric vanished. The recipient? A man named Leo Haskins, previously linked to identity forgery, document laundering, and, most chilling, helping people fake their own deaths. The same man had been connected to a case in Arizona, where a husband disappeared under similar circumstances and was found months later living in Mexico under a new name. Authorities attempted to locate Leo Haskins. But he was already gone. Meanwhile, Julian's home was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except a laptop, 2 photo albums, and a box labeled "Wedding Keepsakes." No fingerprints. No forced entry. And then Jasmine began receiving messages. They came from an encrypted email account. Each one short, vague, but unmistakably personal. One read, "You shouldn't have gone to Julian. This was never your story to tell." Another said, "Amelia deserves better than the lies you're feeding her." The most recent one, "I watched you from across the park. She looks like me." Attached was a blurry photo of Jasmine holding the baby on a bench. Taken from a distance. The implication was clear: Eric might still be alive. And watching. Investigators couldn't prove it. Julian was assigned protection. So was Jasmine. But neither slept through the night again. Because if Eric was still out there, he wasn't just running. He was planning. The investigation took a sharp turn the day an unmarked package arrived at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. There was no return address. No note. Just a small, flat cardboard envelope with a single USB drive inside. It had been mailed from El Paso, Texas. The only handwriting was scrawled across the back in red ink. Delivered to Detective Monica Ruiz. For your eyes only. When Monica inserted the drive into a secure workstation, she expected photos. Maybe a few files. But what she found changed everything. The folder contained 6 video clips. All time-stamped between March and May, weeks after Eric was declared missing. In each, a man with striking resemblance to Eric, though thinner and more unkempt, was seen walking in and out of a weathered Airstream trailer parked in the middle of an open desert lot. No license plate. No visible neighbors. Just endless dust and heat shimmering across the screen. But it wasn't just the footage. It was what he said in clip 3 that dropped Monica's stomach. The camera sat on a dusty countertop. Eric paced behind it, talking to someone off-screen. "I can't go back," he said. "They'll bury me. Both of them. I lied to Jasmine. I lied to Julian. I lied to everyone. But I'm not the only one who deserves blame." Then, he looked directly into the lens. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't suicide. It wasn't an accident. Look deeper." The file ended abruptly. The FBI was called in. Digital forensics traced the upload location to a motel just outside Ciudad Juarez. The manager remembered a quiet American who paid in cash and never gave a name. Agents obtained a warrant to comb through Eric's bank records again, this time using tools beyond local law enforcement's access. They discovered a web of small cash deposits, under $10,000 to avoid IRS detection, scattered across different credit unions and prepaid cards. All linked to shell accounts under aliases like E. Blackwell and R. Lowell. One card had been used only twice. Once to rent a storage unit in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Once to buy baby items from a pharmacy 3 states away. The Las Cruces storage unit was opened under the name Jack Sandler. The access log showed the unit had been entered just 4 days earlier. Agents moved fast. Inside the unit, they found a bag of burner phones, a case full of identification documents, most forged but one real, and a stash of printed photographs. Every photo was of Julian and Jasmine. Separate. Together. With Amelia. Without. All recent. There were also receipts for gas, groceries, and, disturbingly, children's toys. And in the corner, carefully taped to the metal wall, was a blueprint of Julian's house. Marked with red ink. Arrows pointed to windows, doors, and an X over the master bedroom. The FBI issued a federal fugitive warrant. Within hours, an anonymous tip was called in from Tucson. A man matching Eric's description had been seen at a bus terminal downtown, looking over his shoulder, boarding a long-haul coach bound for Phoenix. Agents intercepted the bus at a rest stop 80 miles north. When they boarded, there were only 5 passengers. 4 were quickly cleared. The 5th sat in the back, hoodie pulled low, earbuds in, eyes closed. A duffel bag at his feet. When the lead agent tapped his shoulder, the man didn't flinch. Only when they pulled back the hood did Eric finally open his eyes. He didn't run. He didn't protest. He simply looked up and said, "Tell Julian." I tried. He was taken into custody without incident. The duffel bag contained $12,000 in cash, a loaded .38 revolver, and a handwritten letter titled, "For Amelia, when you're old enough." It began with an apology. "I never wanted to disappear. I wanted to fix it. But when you start living 2 lives, you forget which one is real." Eric was charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, falsifying legal documents, and suspected endangerment related to the threats toward Jasmine and the baby. The firearm, unregistered, added a federal weapons charge. But the charges didn't stop there. Once in custody, Eric asked to speak with Detective Monica Ruiz privately. What he told her unraveled the case further. Eric admitted to staging the blood scene in the forest cabin. He'd used pig's blood, obtained from a butcher friend he'd once helped with tax issues. He admitted to planting the burnt honeymoon photo. To sending the emails. To everything, except one thing. "I never planned to hurt them," he said. "But someone else did. Someone knew everything before I told them. Someone was watching me long before I ran." When Monica asked who, Eric simply whispered a name. And that's when the entire case shifted once again. Because the name he gave was someone no one had expected. Someone close. Someone both Julian and Jasmine trusted completely. The man who had originally helped Julian file the first missing persons report. Detective Robert Greer. The same man who'd been working the case since day one. The arrest was only the beginning. The real story was still unfolding. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the first 3 rows, their cameras stacked like bricks along the aisle, lenses pointed at the defendant's table. Curious citizens lined the back, whispering rumors that had already made their way into headlines. Some just wanted to see his face. Others came with questions they hoped a verdict would answer. But no one expected what would unfold over the next 7 weeks. Eric Donovan stood accused of orchestrating his own disappearance, committing identity fraud across state lines, and, most damning, conspiring to harm both his husband and the woman he had secretly married and impregnated. But this wasn't just about lies or vanishing acts. The prosecution painted Eric as a man living 2 lives. One built on manipulation, deception, and a deep-rooted fear of losing control. The first week belonged to the evidence. Surveillance footage was played frame by frame, Eric slipping out of hotels in the middle of the night, accessing storage units, fueling up in towns where he shouldn't have been. Receipts were projected on screens the size of chalkboards. Phone records charted a disturbing map of his travels, back and forth between Julian's condo in San Francisco and the quiet home Jasmine thought was hers in Sacramento. But it was the voice recordings that gripped the room. One by one, the prosecution played audio clips from the burner phones found in Eric's duffel bag. Most were journal-like entries, fragments of paranoia, guilt, or justifications. But one changed the temperature in the room entirely. In it, Eric could be heard practicing what sounded like a farewell. "I know how this looks. I know what they'll say. But I swear I was trying to protect everyone. I never wanted it to go this far. I was just tired of living in pieces." There were murmurs in the gallery. Julian sat in the front row, motionless. Jasmine never attended a single day. By week 3, the defense opened their case. They didn't deny Eric's actions. Instead, they painted him as a man unraveling under pressure. A gifted software engineer, raised in a deeply conservative household, whose internal war with his identity had created fractures in his sense of self. They brought in a psychiatrist who testified that Eric exhibited signs of a rare dissociative disorder, compartmentalizing his life to cope with the guilt of living a lie. They argued that he didn't fake his disappearance to manipulate or harm, but to escape a world he believed would never accept who he truly was. That his secret marriage to Jasmine wasn't an act of cruelty, but desperation, an attempt to live the normal life expected of him, even if it meant hiding from the one man he truly loved. The courtroom was split. Some sympathized. Others seethed. But then came the twist. In a dramatic move that no one saw coming, the prosecution turned its attention to Detective Robert Greer, the very officer Eric had named before his arrest. They presented a series of text messages retrieved from an encrypted phone, found during a search of Greer's private residence. Messages that suggested knowledge of Eric's dual life months before the case went public. Mentions of insurance, leverage, and most damning, a screenshot of Eric's forged marriage certificate sent from Greer's phone to an unknown number. It was enough to open a second investigation. Greer was removed from duty and placed on administrative leave. The judge ruled that any direct connection to the current charges was circumstantial, but allowed the jury to consider the possibility that Eric may not have acted alone, or without fear. Week 5 focused on the psychological impact. Julian was called to the stand. He testified with composure, but his voice broke when asked if he still loved Eric. "I did," he said. "I think a part of me always will. But that person doesn't exist anymore." When asked what he felt now, "I feel lied to. I feel robbed. But mostly, I feel sorry for the man who couldn't trust that I loved him as he was." Jasmine refused to testify. Through her attorney, she submitted a written statement. "He made me believe in a future that was never real. I raise our daughter with the hope that one day she will know the truth, but not this version. A better one." Finally, in week 6, the jury was handed the case. They deliberated for 8 days. On the 9th morning, the courtroom held its breath as the foreman stood. "Guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant. On the charge of identity theft. On the charge of falsifying legal documents, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. And on the charge of unlawful possession of a firearm by a fugitive, guilty." Eric showed no emotion. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't move. He simply closed his eyes and exhaled. At sentencing, the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Donovan, you led not one, but 2 lives, neither of which were rooted in honesty. Your actions caused emotional devastation, endangered a child, and wasted countless hours of law enforcement time. But what's worse, you broke the hearts of the very people who believed in you. He was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 18. But the sentence was not the end. Julian quietly sold the condo and left California. Jasmine moved to Singapore to raise her daughter away from the media storm. Detective Greer resigned from the force and remains under investigation. And Eric? He writes letters from prison. Some to Jasmine. Some to Julian. Most are returned unopened. All of them signed. "I'm sorry I wasn't whole." In an interview conducted 2 years after the trial, his only public appearance since the sentencing, Julian said, "I still wake up sometimes thinking I'll see him standing in the doorway, holding coffee, wearing that crooked smile. And then I remember, that man doesn't exist." He never did. Jasmine, too, rebuilt her life, quietly, purposefully. She returned to Singapore with her daughter, Liana, who's now 3. She started a private counseling practice for women recovering from domestic deception and betrayal. She never granted interviews. She never spoke his name again. But she did write a letter, to herself, on the day of his sentencing. "I loved a ghost," she wrote. "And for a time, he made me believe I was the dream." And Eric? He is inmate number 419824 at a federal prison in Colorado. He spends his days working in the prison library and leading a small restorative justice group for men with complex trauma. He's reportedly quiet, keeps to himself, and often journals. In one recent correspondence intercepted by prison staff and later released in court filings, Eric wrote, "I wake up every day and ask the same question, was it love, or was it fear? And why did I choose the latter? There are still unanswered questions." Some believe Eric had helped faking his disappearance. Others think Jasmine knew more than she admitted. A few even suggest Julian may have found out long before the night of the arrest and chose silence over exposure. But none of it changes the reality. 3 lives were shattered. 2 families broken. 1 child left with a legacy she didn't ask for. This wasn't just a case of deception. It was a case of identity, of truth buried beneath layers of shame, of the damage that happens when we try to live in fragments instead of honesty. And now, all that remains is the aftermath. The quiet rebuilding. The long road back from devastation. And the lesson echoing through every corner of this haunting case. Lies don't just destroy trust. They erase futures. What do you think really happened? Was Eric a master manipulator, or a man trapped by his own double life? Did justice truly serve those who were hurt, or were there deeper layers still hidden beneath the surface? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one. If this story moved you, or left you with questions, don't keep it to yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real stories that uncover the truth, the pain, and the resilience of the human spirit, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There's always more beneath the headlines. Stay with us.